But it's like, yeah, you go way up the hill.
I spent a week in healing asbestos and taking on next time. You guys are live.
It's just there.
Okay, so I think we're ready to go. We are streaming live on YouTube, which we have not done with fire meetings. So just everybody be aware that these are live. And we will dive right into, we're a little bit behind, so we'll try to make that time up. Our 9:40 a.m. agenda item, wayfinding update. Nigel, go for it, please.
Excellent. Thanks ever so much. Well, we may be even more behind than I'd hoped. So I'm going to move fast. Please put your hand up if I'm going past something that you really need to have a discussion about. But I'm trying to get through the ROM part of the wayfinding and then the updates to the wayfinding as well. So there's a fair bit for us to cover, and I know you have even more going on as well. So I'll move as quickly as I can. As we start to go talk about the wayfinding elements, we've got these outlined for all the different floors. There are three particular ones on this one that we want to highlight. We've talked about the FCOs that are part of interpretive. They also show up in wayfinding as well in different ways. And this isn't the text. This is just an example of what FCO signage looks like. And then we have a wall-mounted directory. Most of those show up outside of in elevator lobbies. We have flag signs, and we're going to have a further discussion about flag signs later on in this meeting. And then we have just straight wall-mounted signs that the same sort of, and these will be tooled bronze signs that will be attached either perpendicular or right up against the wall. And this is right up against the wall as well. If we go further on, there are ADA signs, and these may end up being, right now we're showing as a tooled bronze. Those may end up being sort of a vinyl on the interior and exterior glass and the side lights by the four entries at the garden level. There's some gold vinyl involved, and then this self-standing wayfinding takes a similar sort of wood base, the same hardwood finishes as we described for the exhibits, with a tooled bronze directory. That's where the telling the different locations, the arrows with the hint at the trompe l'oeil at the bottom, and then kiosks, which are there's variations on those. Some will be reusing existing kiosks, some will be ones that are created that are smaller, have a smaller profile for wayfinding, but those will also incorporate interpretive and other components that Wendy mentioned earlier in our conversation. I wanted to note that we are aware that the backs of the existing ones are open, and that we have accounted for that in our cost estimates to make sure that those will be enclosed as necessary without inhibiting whatever ventilation is needed for the screens. Next. So that's the garden level summarized. Those same elements I just described show up on the first level in a number of different locations. No change there.
Stop on the flag signs for a bit. We did talk about where the signs were out of reach, looking at acrylic. And then I noticed that we had flag signs outside of the elected officials. Necessarily, I don't want to have a flag sign that looks like an elevator or a restroom sign out hanging over my door. So I'll just put that out there for digestion.
Yeah, we're going to discuss flag signs a little more later in these pages. Thanks for bringing that up. We have had some conversations about how to address that, so we want to put that in front of everybody so we can make a decision on how to address those flag signs. The only additional element on this page is this combination digital directory with a static wayfinding. So the directory would live in the base here. The wayfinding, similar to this approach used on the wall mounted, would live above that. And it's a way to sort of combine those two things into small, less real estate. So it still functions effectively, but doesn't take up more space than necessary.
What's the cost of that acrylic flag sign? I think we had that on a discussion about our last one. Will that be in our subsequent discussion?
We haven't. I don't think we've. No, we don't talk about the materiality. But you're right. Since they're up higher, we can probably get away with more on materiality. But right now, since we're in this ROM stage, we've been focused on being consistent with that material across all signs, and the best quality, especially within the Capitol building itself, whether it's up there or at a lower level. That is absolutely and probably should be something that we can explore and get you some pricing on, because yes, the acrylic for those would be much less costly than this flag sign out of tool bronze.
Nigel, one more quick question on that. The current quantities and the ROM costs listed for the flag signs, my understanding is those just relate to elevators and restrooms. Is that accurate?
Current, is that Ian? And as you developed, looked at the message schedule. I mean, right now we're looking at the second floor, and there's 6 of those. What did we say on the first floor?
I believe we included the total number inclusive of the elected officials' offices flag
That's
signs
right.
as well.
You're right. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Correct. So we later in this meeting, we may decide to not have all those to be flag signs. So that's a choice we'll have to make here. Third level, there are some flag signs. There's more of these sort of combination digital, stationary, and some wall-mounted signs. And then and some more gold vinyl. In the extension, more, oh, sorry, are you seeing that? I'm getting these pop-ups. There's more of the similar type of elements, the digital directory, the freestanding tool bronze wayfinding. And then as we move into Hirschler proper, we start to see the acrylic approach that's already well established within the Hirschler building. So we will be either mimicking or using existing signs or creating something new, using the same materiality and approach in the various locations where, and we've kind of defined the Hirschler building as when you kind of get onto the carpet in those spaces where the tile ends and you get on the carpet, and that's when we start to move into the Hirschler proper approach, so that we don't have tool bronze in all those areas as well, which saves us some costs on not having to do tool bronze everywhere, but also helps us be consistent with what's already established throughout the Hirschler building. Because if we had to replace all the Hirschler building signs that are rampant throughout those buildings, rampant's probably not the best word to use for that, then that would be even more costly. So you can see that those signs start to show up a lot more as we move deeper into the Hirschler building from the extension. There's still a few wall directories and on-wall signs in the actual extension corridor area. Then we start to go up different levels. We do have some FCOs in there. We want to sort of define the landings on each of those floors so people understand when they get off the elevator what area they're in. So we're using FCOs to sort of more consistently tell that story, but leaning into the existing acrylic signage for standard wayfinding in those areas.
We have a wayfinding on the on this level going into the stairway of the Hirschler building, so people know that that's how to get there, because there's not elevators in both buildings that will go up and down. And
yes. Yeah, we've done a sort of a vast exploration of where we need signage. There are areas sort of in sort of staff only kind of private areas where there's not much wayfinding going on, but all the public facing areas, the elevator lobbies, corridors, things like that, we've explored all the different visitor journeys that they could take throughout the building to make sure that there's sufficient signage for them to be able to go from one spot to another. And part of your exercise later today will help you to understand how you kind of follow those breadcrumbs all the way from the curb all the way into, and I think the example that we've chosen lands you at the auditors, no, not the auditors, the revenue department. So you'll get a sense of, yeah, I can get all the way from the corner, the southeast corner, all the way to the revenue department, just because these wayfinding signs help me get there. More FCOs, more of the existing acrylic. Same again on the third level and on the fourth level. And I raced through that. I'm sorry. I'm trying to get to the snake stuff. Are there any questions?
Real quickly, a lot of the quantities are 3. For example, the ID signs, there's 3 of those on the 4th level, along with the wall mounted directory. I don't understand the 3rd. I'm picturing 1 on each side, and I don't know where the 3rd one would be. And on the 1st level, you only have 2.
Ian, can you shed light on that right off without jumping into the message schedule to recall all that?
Yeah, we put ID signs in the various landings. What am I trying to say? On each floor, we put ID signs in the various lobbies where we have publicly accessible departments. So the reason we have 3 ID signs on the 4th level is between Hirschler West and East. There should be 3 publicly accessible offices on the 4th level spread across both buildings.
Thank you. I sort of, working in Hirschler East, I sort of forgot about Hirschler West.
I did the same thing. Why is there 3? Oh,
But
yeah.
to be clear, all of these numbers and whatnot are capturing both Hirschler East and West.
Yes, ma'am.
And now it makes a lot more sense. Thank you.
Yes, it really does, doesn't it? I'm glad you asked that. All right. Capital grounds. We have the freestanding, smaller signs, which may end up being the vinyl on the glass. Some of them will show ADA entrance and no firearms. Some will just show no firearms, depending on what the door requires. And then there's some FCOs that we're using as ID signs, especially on the Hirschler building, because right now from the outside, you've no clue which is which. And then there's some of these standing signs that are used throughout. And I'll talk a bit more about these particular signs in a little bit here. But it's a way that we can address Senator Landon, your concern. Was that, I think it was you, about the density of signs in that space. It was a way for us to sort of minimize the profile of those signs. So we'll explore that a little further as we move along here. And then as we finish this out, we sort of boil down that section, and then we give you a page that sort of highlights the whole RUM exercise. I don't know if there's anything you want to mention on this, Tricia, before we move on.
No, that you covered it perfectly. This is just a summary of all of the different elements that we've discussed previously. This summarized page is broken out by floor. So we do have the exhibits broken out separately from the wayfinding, as Nigel mentioned. We also have a breakout of some of the professional services and installation components as well, just for your review. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions, or I'm open for questions as well right now on this component. But just our attempts to really pull together all of the pricing that we've presented in a digestible way that gives you a quick snapshot.
So I have a question on page 29. Is the directory digital directory on 3rd level 3? I've not seen that before. At least I don't recall it. So that's new, and they're essentially $71,000 per unit. So
Nigel, would you mind flipping back to that page really quickly?
Which one is
29, I believe.
And Mr. Chairman, those are actually replacing the units we have up there now.
And the units we have now will be repurposed down at the garden level, main floor and extension.
Yes.
These units, I would say again, this is another area we brought up to DI that based on what we already know about electronic wayfinding and hardware and casework, that we think these are high. They do also combine a tooled bronze static directory.
That one, okay.
We do believe this pricing needs major refinement. And it also doesn't account for some redesign costs across all of the units. It's lumped into these new ones. So it's an area that needs additional refinement and exploration of the whole concept of what those kiosks will do.
Absolutely. Thank you, Wendy. And just to add some clarity as well, this is a number that accounts for every possible addition of a scope that we've all discussed. So again, combining the directories with the interactive technology. This does cover the cost to, if needed, completely redevelop the existing application. If we're not able to find a way to utilize what has originally been developed with the other company. So again, as Wendy stated, these costs do have the ability to come down. We just wanted to be as inclusive as possible of that overall price so that we don't come back later and say, oh, we forgot this element, it's going to be more expensive. So this price, please do look at it as the ultimate, the top level, and then we can come down and refine from there.
And then I do have a question, for example, like on the tool bronze, what right next to that, you've got $5,000 per flag. And that, to me, that price just jumps out at me as way over the top. And we could do, why would we do that and not just have it done locally? But just get your feedback on that.
Absolutely. I can kind of start off, Nigel, and then maybe this might be a good opportunity to jump into the discussion about the flag signs. So that price does account for, again, the largest size. Not all of the flag signs will need to be multi-layer or multi-levels tall, accounting for multiple layers of text. And then also just so yes, this page kind of gives a good overview of the potentials of design iterations for those flag signs. And also just the fact that it is suspended from the wall accounts for some additional costs from an overall engineering and fabrication perspective. But with that, Nigel, I'll turn it over to you for the design discussion.
Yeah, so as we did a walkthrough, there was some discussion about where and how to use flag signs. There's obviously concern that we don't overwhelm the gorgeous interior of the Capitol with a bunch of wayfinding signs, so to the point that they distract from some of the details. Measured against that is the desire to help people find where they're going. So wayfinding needs to be able to do its job. That's partly why we've chosen the tool bronze materials. So aesthetically, it enhances the space, but there's still the potential for it to be sort of an eyesore if there's too much of it. There was a request to look at adding the seals for the different state offices to the flag sign. So we explored what that would mean. If we went with the sizes that we currently are playing with, which are these here, then we could add the seal, but it wouldn't be at a legible size based on ADA standards for legibility on type, so that the different seals for the different offices, you'd be able to actually distinguish what those offices were by reading the type. If it's this size, you really wouldn't be able to. You would just see a seal and you might just as easily assume it's the state seal than the state treasurer seal. So for us to get to a scale that allows us that legibility, we're talking about a considerably larger size. It would be wider than 2 feet. I think it's almost 2¼ feet in width and much taller as well, probably about 1 foot tall. So you can start to see how much space that would take. There are certain limits for what we can do with bronze for flag signs. Not because they can't produce them at that size, but because of how they're configured so that they can be mounted on the wall and that the weight of them isn't a concern because this guy might be walking underneath them. So we would have to probably look at acrylic versions if we went to this scale. So the discussion we need to have is, do we want flag signs? How frequently do we want those flag signs? And there's some instances where I think it's probably important. Outside directing towards elevators and restrooms, those are significant destinations, and there's not a very convenient way, other way to do that without adding these stanchions that are really not very good for wayfinding because they're so low profile. And that's what we have currently. If we went with flag signs, then we need to define what spaces deserve a flag sign and what format do those flag signs, how those flag signs express, with or without seals or things like that. I added this other one just to show you sort of the limits of text on a space like that if we're also including a flag sign, and you can start to see this one how much bigger this one would need to be just to get the superintendent of public instruction on there with a seal. And I just use the same seal on everyone, so just you can ignore the specificity of the seal I used for this exercise. What do people think?
I think
So-
it's good acrylic on those larger ones. There's no need to spend $10,000 for a sign that's going to fall on somebody's head.
So, Nigel, I'll start and express my opinion, but then it's going to be really important to hear from everyone. I see the value of the flag signs in a pretty limited application, like for the elevator and the restrooms, and those things are at the ends of the hall. So if you are milling around in the center and looking for something, those really provide a value, and they sort of replace those sort of awkward standing in the middle of everything signs that say restrooms this way. So so makes for easier travel through there. I personally, I'm really struggling with adding flag signs we are essentially adding them to the rotunda, to the entire centerpiece of the Capitol. And I think I'm just not sure that I'm in favor of adding them to the elected's office. I think if we need better signage for the elected's office, I think we can discuss that, but I'm not supportive of adding the flag signs over the elected offices, but I'd love to hear.
Well, as the elected, I guess.
In light, I was just going to say, in light of that, I thought it would be helpful to look at these flag signs don't live isolated. There is a considerable amount of other wayfinding signage that lives within the space that helps people move. You can see all these little tags on here that show all the different wayfinding. So that's should be part of the consideration. And I'm sorry, I interrupted somebody.
And I think I would agree with the auditor on flag signs in the area of the rotunda on the electeds, because both your office and the Secretary of State's office, their doors face the rotunda. So people can walk up to those doors and actually see your names on the doors. Or I think before the governor moved into that Secretary of State's office in the old days, I guess, they actually had Secretary of State and the auditor, I think, above the doors and larger legible. And it's not a flag sign. I don't see any need to have a flag sign in the rotunda. Agree with you 100% there. But when you look at the superintendent of public instruction, the treasurer's office, basically we're down the hallways, and nobody even knows that we're down there unless they happen to be walking around and seeing it. So there's no direction to those offices because we're not facing the rotunda.
In good points, Treasurer. And I'm just wondering how can we remedy that maybe without flag signs? And I would comment that the secretary and the auditor are in the front, but if our doors are open, there's nothing. If the door is open, you would actually have to enter the office before you. So we have different problems, but they're actually similar, because if the offices are open, then nobody knows who we are either. So I'm not sure if that could be accomplished through a wall sign, or if that's not going to be appropriate, giving paint, and it can be captured with, on the on the freestanding signs, I guess. I do think the answer that DI is needing today is do we want flag signs for the electeds or not?
Well, I think we want signage for the electeds that can be seen, the doors open or closed.
But not flag, or
Well, I don't think you need flag signs in the rotunda, because I think you can have that like it was before the remodel, just the auditor right above the auditor's door and Secretary of State right above the Secretary of State's door. So if the doors are open, there's that signage the way it used to be, and that was very functional. So, you know, I think that's fine. But when you look at trying to figure out how you direct people to wanting to go to the find out about education in the Capitol, how do you direct them to that? Whether it's a sign in the rotunda with an arrow around the side, or, you know, or the same way as the treasurer, you know, flag signs would allow people, if they were looking down the hallway, they would see that that's the door. Where I came up with that is that if you go to the courthouse in Platte County, they've got a sign hanging out over the treasurer's door that's down the hallway with a arrow pointing down there. And then if you want to get your licenses and stuff, and they've got another sign that basically, and these are on an old plank of wood with an arrow with chains hanging down. But that's how they, you know, if somebody's walking into that facility for county offices, that was their wayfinding back in probably when they built the thing back in the 1800s or whenever it was, or the early 1900s. So that's where I came up with that. Yeah, we need some way to direct people to those offices, because you can't see them walking into the rotunda.
Any other thoughts?
Madam Chairman, just a couple of things. I think for today, what I would suggest is that we could put on reserve, you know, the second list, if you will. I think that some of these are necessary for the restrooms and for the elevators. When you get beyond that, I have the same reservation that you do, Madam Chairman. Just I think you can overdo it in a real hurry. The other caution that I would give, so anyway, for Nigel's benefit, I would say that we hold that in reserve. I'm not saying that we would never do more of those, but you know, let's take it under consideration and give it some thought, walk the building, see. Beyond that, I caution using a whole lot of different symbols on your signage. I'm really reserved on that front. For example, there's one state seal. And Nigel pointed out that on these flag signs, for example, those are really tough to reproduce it anyway. So you probably don't even want the state seal there, but you certainly, I really think I would caution having all sorts of different images. Now, I don't even know, I'm looking at construction management, our folks here, I don't even know what the guidepost is with respect to the utilization of several different kinds of seals, but boy, I really caution.
Well, Senator,
that.
I can tell you that our seal is statutorily authorized. And if you go into the third floor Hirschler, it's right as you get out the elevators, you know, we have our seal on the wall.
Oh, I think.
And we've never had a complaint about it.
No, I'm not saying, I'm not complaining. I'm just saying signage wise, I don't, whether they're statutory or not, the Treasurer Meyer, I'm just saying that I don't think you necessarily want all kinds of images scattered throughout the Capitol complex. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I'm saying that we've got plenty of things scattered throughout the Capitol complex. And if you can't have signage to your elected officials within the Capitol, then I'm not sure what signage you actually do.
So I think where we are is we don't, I think that moving forward, as far as information DI needs today, we'll sort of hold this in reserve, but recognizing that we want to be judicious with the use of flag signs. I do have a question, and Treasurer, you might know this. I don't know that, I know my office has a seal. I don't know, are the seals permanent? Because my understanding is that they can be recrafted by different electeds. Does anyone?
Well, I know we did not have a seal that we could find, for our office, so we did design it.
So I guess I would maybe even come at it from a little different angle. I think my understanding, and I happily be corrected from, from a legal standpoint. I think my concern is that the signage, whether we go with the flag sign or not, should last longer than any one of our terms. And so I guess that would be more my hesitation of including the seal, as the next person can come in and change the seal. And so then it's another, that's my understanding, but I could be inaccurate there. I do think perhaps, naming the office in a clear fashion, but I think the seal makes everything get really, really large. And then that sort of adds to the detraction of having this pretty substantial thing competing with the trompe l'oeil paint on the first floor.
Madam Chair, we do have some mock-ups, some foam core mock-ups of these different versions of that flag sign upstairs when we do the walk that we can take a look at.
Right.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool.
Well,
Couple more notes before we move on, and we need to make some more progress. Currently, there do in fact exist some flag signs in the building. All the building, the Capitol building. You'll probably remember seeing them in the corridors over the restrooms, for example. All the sign within the Capitol building are tool bronze. So I'd be very hesitant to introduce a different material within the building. Even though higher up, it's not as directly visible, but you will still be able to tell a difference. So that's something that you would want to consider as you explore your answer to these questions. And then lastly, there is more than just those flag signs to get people to different destinations. So for example, there's one of these stationary mobile wayfinding right here in this area, and then another one right here. So if you were trying to find the superintendent of schools, you would be directed from here and here to get to that space. So there are existing signs within the system that would help you to get to those spaces. So that should be part of your consideration as you're deciding how to approach this question. All right. Consideration about the wayfinding on the exterior. We explored a standing directory and a reader rail. Our recommendation was the standing directory because it's more easily legible for someone that is sort of at a walking gait, trying to find their destination as they've left their car. This type of orientation inclines people to sort of pause to try and read it and understand it. So this works better as a wayfinding tool. Because of the saturation of these signs, we're recommending these for the exterior areas of the grounds and these on the more central areas of the ground. So it might be helpful to see that demonstrated here. The little green capsules are all these larger directories, which a lot of them will include a map of the area. So you can see them across the top here and around the sides and across the bottom. And then these smaller profile standing signs that are more specific to that particular area, you'll see are at the heart of the campus. Oh, I didn't mean to jump there. Does that make sense? I guess we need a decision from you folks as to whether or not we can move to these standing directories, or if you want us to use the reader rail approach instead.
Nigel, I'll start again. I really agree with everything you just said. I am inclined to scrap the reader rails for wayfinding and go with the upright, but everyone else please opine. I'm getting a lot of nods.
Nods are good.
Do we want to see what it looks like? I mean, it's hard to see in a presentation and with a description versus. I mean, I don't know how many mock-ups we have. Do we have a reader rail mock-up?
Yeah, there's a reader rail mock-up that we sent you.
I think we should walk it.
And Nigel, one question I had on the mock-ups that we received.
Yeah.
We didn't get the freestanding vertical. Is that about the same height as or the same size as the one on the interior?
Ian, is that the same height? I think it is, isn't it?
Yes, it is the same height.
Okay, so we could use that one to kind of compare the two. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I was wondering. All right, thank you.
And the other commentary is the reader rail does have more capacity to collect weather incidents.
Yes.
And we need to wayfind, as you mentioned, all year long, where the standing and gazing at the interpretation is not going to happen when it's 10 below. And
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
so I think, Nigel, we'll take a look at the mock-ups, but I think the inclination so far is we like your suggestion.
Yeah. And we don't realize it as people that move through the world, but wayfinding, as long as it's done appropriately, tends to disappear into your peripheral. So when you're looking at the building and enjoying the building, you're not trying to poke over wayfinding. You use that peripheral capability, and you're able to sort of move to the side and capture the image that you want to capture for your Instagram post without the encumbrance of signage. So we'll be very selective about the placement. So for example, you see here that we're suggesting it to the right, and it'll sort of get lost in the trees that are gathered here instead of to the left, where it would start to become more of an element within the photograph if you were taking an Instagram, for example. Another question we have, and this relates to type size. There's a couple of locations, I'm indicating one here, where we need a considerable amount of content on the wayfinding side, both directional and then an explanation of a directory of everything that's in that building. So we need an accommodation that we can move from this established type size that we all agreed on to a variant of that, where we would use the established size for the specific directory directional elements, and then the smaller size for the directory. And I'm trying to give you a reference here. If this is a 1/2 inch block, then this is the size of the type. So you can see how that relates. And as we look at best practices for legibility, they're saying for somebody that's 50 inches, 48 to 50 inches away from a sign, it needs to be about a 1/2 inch tall. So it meets that standard. And the space that we're talking about where they would be at, let me go back to that, is around that space. 3 to 4 feet is where you would be looking at this because of how crowded. And that's true for anywhere where we want to put these directories with the smaller site. Most of them are like elevator lobbies that would have that smaller type size. So we just need your okay to move to that type size for those instances where your proximity is closer and the amount of content kind of requires it.
Just to reiterate, you're saying that it is legible and you recommend we approve it.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Based on ADA standards, it meets or exceeds the legibility standards. I mean, ADA would say that this type is more than adequate, and they would say that this is perfectly fine on the right side of this. So we are more than exceeding legibility in both cases here.
Okay.
And when you start to look, I don't think we sent you any samples of this size, but you got plenty of samples of this size in the mock-ups that you're looking at. And you'll start to see how big that is and how easily legible it is in the context of the space. All right. I just wanted to, we are going to be sharing some text template tools with you again. They're going to start to show up in file stage in the next few weeks. So I just wanted to remind you of what those look like and how you can review them. All the numbers that you've seen on the map are indicated in the story number, and then these are broken, an explanation of what the content goals for the particular area was, a description of what that element that the content was going to live on, an example of what that exhibit structure looks like, with an example of what the graphic panel that lives on that structure might look like, and then just as a shortcut reference, if you don't want to look at the actual map, you can see a sort of snippet of the map to show where that content lives precisely. And then there'll be it'll indicate the headline and the body copy and the captions. It'll indicate what kind of space we have for word count. So anything that we do or change or edit to that will impact the word count and whether or not it can actually live within the real estate that we have on those panels. It'll show you images that have been selected, and in some cases, when we have multiple image options, it'll show you the different image options if you want to choose between multiple image options. If that's the case, or if one has already been selected by the core group based on the choices that we gave them, then that's all you'll see. Okay, so I just wanted you to understand and we walked through this a little while ago, but I wanted you to anticipate how those would arrive when you started to review those contents and what to look for. And then I thought I'd just throw in, your core team suggested it might be helpful to see an example of how that text sort of translates into an actual panel in the end. So this shows you an example of what that text template that we just walked through looks like in real life, and this is the structure that it will actually be applied to. So it gives you a sense of the full story. We don't get to this level until sort of the DD stage, but it's kind of nice to get a hint at what these are going to live like when they finally come to fruition. So when we're talking about the different batches, batch 1, which covers the Capitol building, first floor and Capitol grounds, currently we're aiming to have that in file stage available for you for the review on 5/30, and your feedback we request by end of day on 6/13. Batch 2 is the same, and that just covers Capitol building second floor, available on file stage by end of day on 5/30, and feedback required. So you'll on 6/13. So you'll have a couple of weeks to live with those documents and review them and provide us your feedback. The wayfinding message schedule is I think it's already on the file stage. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we're asking for feedback in 2 weeks from you on the message schedule. So let me kind of walk through. How am I doing? We got 7 minutes. Let me walk you through those wayfinding tools, because this will be helpful to you. So when we think about the whole map, there's a bunch of information that's gathered on there that will help you to translate and understand and sort of orient yourself as you're trying to review the message schedule. Each map has this key on it, and you saw that in the bottom right corner, that indicates the different types of exhibits and different types of wayfinding, and the different colored capsules describe the types of wayfinding that exist there. And you'll see those capsules indicating the different signs and their precise location, and it'll show you the orientation of the sign, so which way it's shaped and the angle you look at it. So if it's a double-sided, and Ian, maybe it's better if you explain how this works than me, because you've worked more intimately with this than I have.
Yeah. So with these keys, pardon me, with these exhibit wayfinding keys that we have pulled together, we have applied for the wayfinding. We've applied colors to represent the different types of wayfinding. So that's what the list indicates, so directory, freestanding, etc. There's a little call out that sort of indicates the information on inside of each one of those little pill-shaped bubbles. So the bottom number for the wayfinding is the area that it's in. So when we're looking at the plan over on the left, if you take 1F-SE-02, that's the area that sign would be located. And then the top number is the actual sign number itself in that area. So Nigel's cursor is on, I believe, FS01 1F-NE-02. So that's sort of how to read those signs. A lot of these signs are double-sided. So when you are reviewing these plans, the sign, if the longer side is oriented top and bottom, side 1 is on the top, is on the north side of the drawing, side 2 is on the south side of the drawing. If the graphic long side is vertical, so facing east-west, side 1 is on the left and side 2 is on the right. So when you are reviewing the message schedule, we have side 1 verbiage and side 2 verbiage, and that correlates to the side 1 and 2 illustrated on these plans.
And then just to bounce back at how that relates to the message schedule. This is just a screen grab from a part of the message schedule. So just as Ian was describing, I've circled the red number, and that indicates the area that Ian was mentioning. In this case, it's first floor 1F, Northwest NW 02, the second area within that Northwest area. And then it'll, I've circled in blue the particular sign. So that's the particular sign that this line is referencing here. And then that hopefully that makes it a little easier for you to navigate through. This is complicated, and I understand that it's a very hard thing to review because you need to put yourself in the place and understand what direction you're facing as you look at the sign, whether the arrow is pointing in the direction that you think is appropriate for that particular sign. And in some of these cases, the one I picked out here is just an ID sign, so it doesn't need an arrow. But if it has an arrow, it would show up here in the verbiage. Instead of an X arrow, it would be an arrow pointing to the direction that's required for that message to work. So that's the only way to really get a sense of whether this is accurate or not. I don't want you all to feel the weight of having to go through every last one of these and understand that. Your core team has done some wonderful due diligence, and they're working through that, as well as, of course, your team at DI has had a great effort in walking through all these as well to make sure that we're accurate. I don't know if Wendy or Rihanna, if you want to clarify your expectations here or not, because I just know how intimidating this process might be for some people.
Madam Chairman, I think what would be good for subcommittee review is, there's lots of ways to skin a cat. So part of it is, there is, we'll make sure that the arrows are pointing the right directions and everything else. But I think for you as users to sort of get a sense of, would this make sense to me if I was standing here looking at this sign? I think that's really important. And then 2, how much information you think is needed on the signs. And right now they're skewed towards more information. For example, I believe this deck still includes all the exhibit locations. As you go through, that might be something to get a sense of, wow, is there just too much on this sign and I can't find the treasurer's office, for example. You will also have another opportunity at I believe it's the June or July meeting, where we're going to work on with DI to have these mocked up in place. So you'll actually be able to stand at the wall and see the arrows. So this is kind of the first cut, and then it will be refined based on your feedback.
Okay.
So I think the message is, don't leave this till the night before.
Absolutely.
It's very detailed. And you'll
So
have-
if everybody is sufficiently terrified of this document, I'll move on to the next thing. Actually, Tricia, I think there was a request to talk a bit about go back and talk a bit about the statutes.
Yes.
I'm going to leave this section until we're till the end here, because it's going to be part of the exercise you're going to do through the walkthrough?
And
Yes, it
Nigel, I'll introduce that a little bit. We had some interest or sort of re-bringing up of the location of the statues at the last meeting. And so I believe you have sort of the renderings that DI has done
Yeah.
to the location that, and please, anyone correct me if I'm wrong, has been approved by both SBC and Management Council. And so, but I think perhaps Wendy, I mean, I think maybe what we wanted to hear of just a little bit of the overview about how we got to where we did and why we are where we are, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but are you able, you having the most sort of institutional knowledge, able to give a little bit of background? And then we can have Nigel sort of show the renderings that this committee has dealt with and have been approved by Management Council and SBC.
Madam Chairman, certainly. And what we were asked to do by the co-chairman is there's been a lot of information and interest out there about the statues, and some of that background may not have been fully represented. So this is definitely not advocacy on where they ultimately go, but just the history of how they ended up where they are, and this subcommittee's work to date on where you had planned for them to go. And so I think the first thing to understand is that when, so the Capital Restoration and Rehabilitation Oversight Group that existed through the Capitol Square project had very deliberately started looking very early on in 2015 about what the visitor experience would be as part of that restoration project, and specifically what the student experience would be. Those statues were relocated. Both the Esther Hobart Morris statue and the Chief Washakie statue were relocated off-site during this project. This extension that you sit in now was stripped bare and open to the elements until early 2019. And so there was an impression that the statues were just put down here and a decision was never made. So the background that I was asked to provide you is, why did the oversight group make the decisions that they did? And in 2015, they hired an exhibit designer, which actually has led to this process, to start thinking through how the visitor experience could be enhanced through the Capitol Square project. And as reported, there were several reasons for moving these statues indoors. There was concern about the long-term preservation of them. We have some information from the Chief Washakie sculptor about those pieces not being planned for the exterior of the building. There was also concern, this has been brought up, about there were getting to be a lot of pieces of statuary added to the grounds over time. And so a concern about whether or not there was a need to revisit that. The oversight group actually had also wanted all statuary removed off the grounds, and frankly ran out of time and money before that happened. But the choice for putting the Chief Washakie and Esther Hobart Morris was very deliberate, specifically for student visits. And when the exhibit designer did their work in 2015, they recommended not having the buses come in on 24th Street. It's a busy road. It's difficult to park buses there, and to reroute all school buses and tour buses on 26th Street, that dedicated drive. That is now the bus drop-off location. All students, as you know, and this is part of our wayfinding charge, is to all those students come in through the Hirschler East building down into the space you're sitting in now. The difference prior to the restoration is kids would come off the bus on 24th Street, and the oversight group had a concern because they all ran into the building. They'd been on the bus for a while. They had to use the restrooms. It was often cold outside during the school year when they'd be visiting, and they actually didn't have interpretation of the pieces. So the oversight group wanted those statues to be moved to a more prominent location that could be part of the school tours. So now what happens, and I'll turn it over to Rihanna for the number of visitors and students we have in this space. Now what happens is students come down to this location here. There's a backpack room, they put their backpacks, they get settled in, they get a few words of advice from the teacher. They can use the restrooms here. And then their tour actually starts at the two statues. So regardless of where ultimately they go, that was a huge goal of the oversight group, is that those statutes get specific interpretation. And as part of the work you've done to date, there will actually be electronic kiosk information that provides much more detail about both of those individuals in Wyoming's history. There was, as Auditor Racinas mentioned, I can't remember how many months ago this was, but as part of your recommendations for composite relocation and creating this area outside of this space to be a true rotating exhibit and art gallery, is to move the statuary to the south end of the extension, where they can each be lit under a skylight and have a view up to the dome. And that was the discussion earlier today about needing to have different height bases, because Esther is a 1.5 scale, and I need your help here, and 1.25 scale, and the chief is real life scale. So there is a need for different height bases. And I don't know if Rihanna wants to say anything about the number of visitors and students we have, and then we'll turn it over to you. And there's some renderings that DI did when the subcommittee made these recommendations to Management Council and SBC.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Madam Chair, so to date, we've had roughly about 80,000 visitors who have experienced the Capitol since the grand opening. And as you saw today, you might have seen the students were on their best behavior, dropping their coats off, but we have had about 700 students just the month of May touring the Capitol. So we've had thousands of students touring the Capitol. And as you know, the student experience most of the time is legislative session and spring tourists. So they're coming mostly during the winter through the end of May. And as Wendy noted, they are experiencing, their tour begins just right out of the hall. So you saw them come, I don't know if you guys saw them, they dropped off their coats, and because we were using this room today, they went to the visitor center and had their welcome, and then they start their experience there. So I will say the students are very excited about the statues because they learn about those two figures in Wyoming history, and we see a lot of fourth graders through high school. And they like to see the detail of them up close, particularly the feathers of the Chief Washakie are of interest to them. They like to count them. So that is something that they've engaged with on a deeper level because they can see them so close at the beginning of their tour. But I will say they do seem to be an interest point, and they're kind of, the students like to think of them as their welcoming figures to the Capitol.
Sure. Thank you very much. I appreciate you providing a little bit of an update, Wendy and Rihanna. And the chairman pointed out 3 or 4 different media outlets have picked this story up again after a couple of years. And so I just thought it would be useful to the subcommittee to have that background and remember how we got to where we are today. I think essentially what our subcommittee has adopted and is going to recommend to the SBC is that those 2 pieces become centerpieces to the community area down in this part of the complex. And so contrary to the indication that they were being hidden, I think they're actually being highlighted. So unless there's any other discussion, that was our intention, is just to catch everybody up and help everybody know, how we got to where we are today. Because there has been some interest shown. It does kind of underline for me, that this is a great exercise, what we're trying to do in the Capitol complex. So many things, so many different passions and interest points. And we're going to make the best recommendation we can to the SBC on all fronts, but lots and lots of interest and lots of things to be excited about here in the conference. So thank you.
Yeah, and Mr.
Appreciate it.
Co-Chair, Nigel, thanks for pulling this up. I don't know if we need you to add anything, but if there's anything you'd like to add, I think it's been interesting to have DI come on, who has not been part of the long conversation about the statues.
and has created these renderings. And some of that plan, as you know, has already been executed. Namely, the composites, the legislative composites, when we went through this initial exercise, when these renderings were done, the composites were not there as well, were not there at that point. I think this was maybe in October or November. I know we were down to the wire to get composites moved. But that part has been activated. The other thing, one of the cons on this plan was, while we would have to move the rotating exhibits, the art exhibits, also has been accomplished. And just, I mean, I know we've said this before, but huge compliments to Kevin and his operation. So the art is now in the sort of Hirschler Rotunda, which they really knocked it out of the park for the session. I mean, I think there was a few people that potentially doubted that concept, but seeing it in person, that has really been elevated. It's super cool. In fact, so much that the legislature came in and followed that up with additional appropriations to elevate that space and make sure we have proper lighting, to really make that, I mean, it is an art gallery, and you just really did a good job with the art chosen. So, and I'm guessing we may hear some additional about in public comments, but Kevin, did you have anything to add other than how wonderful you are?
Madam Chairman, no, I think everything's been well captured. You know, I'll admit that I was one of the ones who was skeptical about the placement of the art gallery at that end of the extension, but it has worked out really well. It's an incredibly flexible space for us to work in. And yes, I mean, we were very pleased to get the show that we did into that space. And so looking forward to how we continue to program that area to get the lighting and everything finished up.
So could you give us an update on the condition of Esther? Because there was some work that needed to be done. Where are we at with that?
Yes, Madam Chair, Representative, we have completed that project. So in fact, the money that was raised through sale of the suffrage coins for the anniversary was put into conservation for the Esther Morris sculpture last year. So some of you may know she was knocked off her pedestal in the 1970s, but a car hit it. Another car hit the pedestal, you know, a little bit later, but she didn't sustain damage in that instance. And so it was in pretty rough shape. I mean, there are visible cracks, there were visible spots where some of the structure had become exposed to weathering. The patina was severely damaged from all those years outside. So yeah, she was taken off site. You may have remember, I mean, she was gone for a little while, even from in the extension, to a specialist conservator in Colorado who stripped the whole patina from the surface, fixed all the cracks, fixed any other pitting or other issues there were, and repatinaed the whole surface, brought it back and installed it. So that work is now complete. And just as a note, we also have the Chief Washakie sculpture cleaned and waxed as part of that process. So those will be ongoing. You know, with them inside, the cleaning and waxing is less frequent than it needs to be outside, but will certainly be part of ongoing maintenance for both sculptures.
What was the approximate cost for that? Was it? I don't want to, my memory.
No, I can pull it up here. I know I sent it. Yeah, it was 30-something thousand. It's expensive, and especially for Esther because she was in such poor condition. You know, the cleaning, the waxing is not so expensive, but to move a bronze off-site and specialist art transportation, and you know, they had a gantry in here lifting. It was in that range. I can find it.
And I would presume that maintenance was delayed significantly from what would be ideal for outdoor sculpture. What would be a recommended maintenance timeframe for our exterior sculptures?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There should really be maintenance occurring every 3 to 5 years to keep them in good condition, and I think that there has not necessarily been that. I mean, you probably know the Spirit of Wyoming sculpture has some work that needs to happen as well. So yes, I mean, I don't think there had been significant conservation work done on that sculpture, at least since I've been here until it was completed, yeah.
3 to 5 years turns into 50 very quickly.
Yeah.
if you don't put it on. Okay, thank you for that background. I think that's helpful. And again, I don't mean to rush us, but just making sure we are a little behind. I want to make sure we keep on task. The other item under other business is this committee taking up some manner or course of curation policy. And I'm gonna take a stab at this and then have my co-chair sort of take it away. Essentially, this committee has interacted with the State Building Commission and said, gosh, is this a good place to start or to start considering curation policies as we move forward to the long-term, to the long-term situation as to if and how we accept things to be put in the Capitol. Again, that process is absolutely going to take some time, and I know we all know this, but this branch constitutes, or this committee is 2 branches of government, and whenever we have more than one branch, there's extra steps to be taken, there's boxes to be checked to make sure we are asking all the right questions of all the right people and getting that buy-in. And the reason that it is built that way is statutorily, these spaces are shared spaces between those branches. So Mr. Co-Chair, anything else to add to that? I don't expect us to really delve into the weeds on this today, but anything to.
No, I think that, Madam Chairman, thank you. I think just to help the subcommittee to understand that the SBC and specifically the governor, as the chairman of SBC, have formally asked us to take this up. We had a very good discussion. Treasurer Meyer was there and had some good points made, and Auditor Racines, I just failed to duck at the right time, and it hit us. And so we now have this parallel task in front of us, not to just finish up the work that we're doing for this past year, but to take up where do we go from here, and how do we react to those who want to use this space or to donate to this space, and so we need to take that up. And the chairman is exactly right. We've got to make sure that we represent 2 different branches of government when we do that, and so that we will be pondering where we go from here. But I think we'll be working with staff and considering, do we put together a subcommittee of the subcommittee, or do we take it up all of us together? We've got some things to consider, but we'll go on from here, that effort.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, there's better people than me to speak to this, but the history of this is long and storied, and an immense amount of money was spent to bring these buildings to bear, and a lot of that money had to be spent because essentially there were changes made to this building over the course of time by one branch of the government or other without proper input and without proper vetting. And that's, and not to sound extreme, but that's how we end up with, precious chandeliers shoved in the attic and doors papered over and extra walls put in and acoustic tiles and whatnot. And not to be extremist, but that is exactly what happened over the course of time, and we didn't have the proper channels in place. And so just being very cautious. And in fact, the currently in law in Title IX, legislature makes it so that unless we have an emergency, the executive branch cannot make any permanent changes to this building or add anything or take anything away without approval from SBC and without a legislative session coming and going, and that's in law right now. So we have a box that we have to work in, and I know that's frustrating, but that is the box that we are in, and so I really look forward to that. I think it's, I think we'll come up with something excellent, but that's where we are right now.
So, Madam Chairman, we'd be happy to answer any questions or entertain any thoughts that the rest of you have on the subcommittee in this regard.
I guess the definition between temporary and permanent, because I know there's some issues before us where people want to I guess, put flags of recognition in different areas, and thinking that maybe what we look at is a temporary location until a permanent time is and define temporary is basically it's there until a permanent permanent alternative is defined. And that way, I think we can move fast past different things if that's the timeline that we say temporary is. And I don't know how you guys feel about that or not, because I think that there's some things that need to happen and will happen sooner rather than later. And hopefully we can look at it in that regard and not have the bureaucracy get in the way and essentially put a door in the box.
Yeah, Treasurer Meyer, that's a good point made, and it's a tough consideration, because what I think the subcommittee would want to keep in mind is that you certainly don't want to set precedents, that you can't live by from that point forward. Because when you do it for some, you got to do it for all, kind of thing. But that's an interesting concept. Maybe we can do a temporary sort of approach.
Put something in there that'll hold our feet to the fire. So we just, it's done, it's out of sight, out of mind type of thing. But, kind of look at some kind of structure like that.
So I'll jump in and say I'm really intrigued to use our state museums collection management policy as a lens, as a framework for this, instead of reinventing the wheel. So I'm looking at the document here that's from 2022. There's a whole section on acquisition, best practices and criteria, how things get accepted into the collection, and then those categories of collection, whether it's an educational item or part of the capital art collection, et cetera, et cetera. And so I would be of the mind to meet on this document for our guidance, and suggest that, maybe it's not this group that is accepting items, but that we work with our partners at Eastern Museum to do that process.
And keeping in mind too, we need more of a permanent solution, and this group is not designed to be permanent. We are designed with a task. Yes, I think we expect to, again, probably lean on Kevin a little bit for his expertise. And at some point, my guess is we would probably need to partake in some legal advice from one or both branches too, to make sure we're, knowing that the state has come into hot water before on this issue.
But we're essentially advisory.
I think our job is to come up with a draft, an outline to present back to both bodies.
I think that's a good suggestion, Representative, and I'm looking at Wendy, who has been involved in the information effort for the legislative branch for a long time, and I think there's probably a document or two that we can lean on, reach back. Even before the Capitol was renovated, there were guideposts in place as to who could set up a display and who was not allowed, and that sort of thing. Restrictions that were put in place. You remember the old walkway used to have exhibits once in a while, and I think there were guideposts.
Mr. Chairman, we're happy to bring you at future meetings, both the collections policy that Representative Sherwood mentioned, as well as there used to be the former chaired by former Secretary of State Maxfield Capital Complex Arts Advisory Committee. There were some policies surrounding that. Kevin has worked to find some policies from other state capitals. So we will work to gather that information for you for background as you move forward in this effort.
And Mr. Chairman, just to be clear, and please correct me if I'm wrong, we don't want to scare DI. We do not expect DI to we don't need DI, you have no homework in this lane. This is just to make sure you don't think this is something that we expect you to do. It is not.
Just to clarify, you don't have to go back and redo anything on this.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Looks like we better move on to the acoustics update.
So, Madam Chair, we had a meeting, I think last week with both DI and Vermont Acoustics, discussing their draft report. And as I mentioned earlier, it was a very good, very thorough report on capital, the different spaces that we asked them to analyze. They gave recommendations on what materials to add to those spaces to bring them up to their recommended reverberation times and things. We did have some updates that we asked them to do in regard to some of the spaces. They were wanting to add quite a bit of acoustic material in the space, and we didn't think that was very practical. So we asked them to give us kind of a baseline of what that would look like if we did say 50% of the walls or things like that. I did see their final report that came back to us yesterday evening. I have not had a chance to look at that to make sure those updates were done. But at any rate, we do have that final report, and we'll take a look at that and hopefully be able to start moving forward with that project.
So quick question, well, what kind of a time frame are we looking at for the bulk of effort on the acoustics?
Well, I believe the funds for that project there is a daylight for those. So I think that's next July. That's when we have to utilize those funds.
So we have a little over a year to try to.
Mr. Chairman, the funds need to be fully encumbered by June 30th of 2024. If work extends beyond that, I think that's okay. There are accounting processes that can happen to let it go longer, but it absolutely has to be encumbered or it reverts. It was added to our operational budget in lieu of a CapCon, which CapCon projects do not revert.
Thank you for that.
So what's the size of the report?
Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, we will review that and make sure they included all of our recommendations for refinement of that report, and then we'll send it out to the full subcommittee. And then you will have time to review that in advance of the next meeting. And then you'll have an opportunity to start making recommendations on what you would like to see pursued for procurement. And it's really a smorgasbord of options. Some of them are AV changes. As I mentioned at the last meeting, some of them are free. Some of them are user etiquette issues with the sound system. Some of them are refinements to the sound system. And then some of them are recommendations about what would actually be affixed to walls. So you have both sound reinforcement from your AV system, as well as how your room reacts to sound. So it's kind of a collection of solutions.
Okay, thank you for that. With that, we will go ahead and move into public comments. Public comment. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair. I sent an email to.
If you would identify yourself really
Oh, I'm
quick. Thank
sorry.
you.
I've been here before, so Madam Chair, but I am Judy Lindsay and I'm with the Daughters of the American Revolution. And I'm here once again to talk about the 250th anniversary of our nation's founding and a plaque to commemorate the men and women who fought for our country. And I was told it would be okay. I made a hard copy of what I emailed you. And so I will make sure to look at this. Mr. Chair, Madam Chair.
We can distribute those for you that if you wanted to just.
Okay, you want to do this? Okay. Thank you. I had asked what would the proper thing would be, and then they said to go ahead, so, but thank you. Anyway, at the state commission, excuse me, State Building Commission meeting, Representative Nichols asked for this information. So about the monuments and markers that the Daughters of American Revolution have, and we have a long history as we go back to 1890s. And there are over 177,000 DAR markers around the United States. We have some overseas, but they don't have the exact number because some of them were put up without authorization back in the 1940s. And as you can see, there are about 20 pages of monuments and markers just for the state of Wyoming. One thing that I included on there, because that's not a monument or a marker, but the Cheyenne chapter in particular helped put in funds when Constitutional Square was erected behind City Hall. So we are involved in a lot of these type of projects in order to preserve history. And I just want to say thank you so much for all your kindness. And everybody I have worked with has been very kind. And I understand that you need to be fair and consistent. And I did check around with other states to see what they do, what their process is. And they start with the history. Associations, mostly it's a society and stuff. That's where most of them that I've been able to talk to do it, just like you had suggested, Representative. And so I started this back in November, and my journey on this has been very unique. And if everybody went through the same process that I've had to go through, you guys wouldn't have to worry about having to put anybody else in the same process, because I don't think many people would keep coming and keep coming and keep coming. And I've come several times now, and like I said, I do appreciate all this, but I want to encourage you. I understand the concern. You've been sued before and you don't have a process. And it sounds like now you're going to try to work out to have this expedited. And I want to thank you for that. And I just wanted to see if there's any other questions or any other materials that you might need that I could help, in this manner. I just would like to see this done. Again, I have to know a definite yes or no by the end of summer, and I define that by the end of August in order to be able to complete it by May 18th, 2024, where we could kick off and celebrate our 250th anniversary of the founding of this country. And I think that'd be so exciting to plan something, just get this kicked off. So, I just thank you again. Does anybody have any questions or? Any questions?
Madam Chairman, Ms. Lindsay, thanks for your energy and enthusiasm, your diligence and stick-to-itiveness, and we really appreciate it. We'll do everything we can. I don't know that we can promise we'll have something permanent in place by August. But I really like the suggestion by the state treasurer to come up with some way that we can continue the work. So hope you hang in there with us, and we have taken on a new task, and that is to decide how we're going to handle stuff like this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that is possible because I could get coordinates for the temporary place, and then I could go through the process to have it done to change those coordinates to the permanent place. So thank you for that suggestion. And Mr. Chair, I think that's something that we could work together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Lindsay. Other public comment? If you would just identify yourself for the record before you speak.
Hi, my name is Susan Garrett, and I wanted to make a comment about Esther's statue. I'm a grandma, so I wouldn't take anything away from kids, but I think we all need her. And I think that more than we know, the Capitol building and the grounds and what's there mean a lot to a lot of people. I'm not sure I understand the perspective of not having statues and on the grounds. That doesn't, maybe you can explain it to me, but I think she needs to be in the sunshine, and at a time when we're struggling with equality as much as we are in the state of Wyoming, I think it's even more important. We can get the kids to her a different way somehow. I think there's the barriers on the street, so I don't think people are going to come roll her down with a car anymore. I think we can pay better attention to her care, but she's critical to Wyoming, and we can't forget that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, this Garrett brought up something that I thought was really important, and this whole idea of the barriers. I wonder, I'm looking around the room, I wonder if we can't think about that a little bit.
We actually have an update on that, Mr. Co-Chair.
Gotta be something
I think
better.
this
Is there something?
Suzanne, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, we you know, as you might be aware, in 2019, Governor Gordon created several working groups as subsets for the SBC so that the members of SBC can get into lots of nitty-gritty details and then bring forward a summary of those discussions and recommendations for how things are resolved. Through the last couple of years with COVID and other things, we've had a hard time organizing and having those groups meet. But we have had one master plan, capital area master plan group, and that's the group that will focus on the statutory requirement of SBC to come up with a master plan. And the first thing that we discussed for probably most of the meeting was having those Jersey barriers removed and replaced with something that's more befitting of the Capitol grounds. And I think where we are going to go is having just additional bollards that match the existing bollards that still allow emergency access, perhaps with a removable secure bollard for times when a vehicle might need to access the plaza, the front plaza of the Capitol. So those discussions are underway and hopefully happening sooner than later.
Well, that's good news. Thank you. By the way, thanks for the public comment on Esther.
Yes, thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Peg Osland. I live in Cheyenne. However, I'm a product of Campbell County over many years. I grew up in the oil boom. I went to school in the basement of City Hall because we had no schools at the time. And I grew up in the coal development. We actually, when my father was in the state Senate, authored legislation so that people coming into the boom town were able to buy a home and help cities deal with that kind of impact. We used to come down to Cheyenne. One of the most remarkable things coming from a small town was to see the Esther statue, the beacon, the face of the state capitol, right there. And so in August, because I walked the Capitol Avenue neighborhood for years, and used to talk to Esther when the sun was coming up, as did Mary Guthrie, and Garrett's, and Dr. Ray Fleming Deneen, founder of the Climb program. It was a symbol not just of equality, the suffrage that marked Wyoming in the entire world, mind you, as the first entity to allow women to vote. That's huge. And I say that in perspective because coming from Campbell County that funded so much of this, we used to be billed as the coal capital of the world or the energy capital of the world. That's very exciting. I used to be a landman. But that truly pales to what Wyoming did to come into statehood and allow women to vote. Men and women worked together to birth basically the state of Wyoming. Our proudest moment, our most lasting legacy. And that was represented not just for kids, but for everybody by having her out in front of the Capitol for over 60 years. When they reopened the Capitol, it was shocking that she'd been removed. First, it was because, and I remember going to the Capitol Oversight meeting in the fall of 2019. My mother was alive then. And we went to testify how important that statue was out in front of the Capitol. And that's when they did allocate, I think, $20,000 to get her repaired. $20,000, wow. When you think of what so many of the details in this building cost. She was overlooked. I'm sure, because I did a lot of research, a lot of people don't even know the story of having her designed. Robert Russin was one of the competitors, the famed Wyoming sculptor. He lost out to Dr. Fairbanks from Utah. And the same with the Washakie statue, Dave McGarry. They didn't just design those incredible pieces of art to enhance the student experience. No, they were symbols of the entire state of Wyoming, our values. And we put them out there in a big way, the way outdoor sculpture should be. So my mother and I kicked off in the fall of 2019, along with Mary Guthrie and Vicki Colgan, two women who worked for the state, won a case about coal in front of the United States Supreme Court. I like to put that out there. It puts us in good company. We kicked off opening up a discussion because unless you're a true junkie of some of this bureaucracy and all these meetings, and a good journalist friend of mine said she went to all the meetings, didn't recall anything, Doc, about these statues, to put it out there for the public. And then we made momentum. The attention that it got just on the social media. I had people call me wanting to give money to get her back. We got interrupted by COVID. I mean, that just shut down anything. And then in 2021, my dear mother became ill. She could still read the papers before she passed, and she read that we had invited the NRA to headquarters here. And her comment was, we can invite the NRA to headquarters here, but we cannot get Esther Hobart Morris back in front of the state capitol. There's something wrong with that picture. So this got, the gauntlet got picked up again, the movement, so to speak, because I promised my mother I would carry the torch. And secondly, I'm back. I have 2020, 2021, and it was not easy. I'm motivated a little extra bit because I don't know if you've noticed in front of the Supreme Court building through this scattered sculpture project that's all over town, they've put a statue of Esther Hobart Morris. about 24 inches high. The most lackluster image of what she represents. All due respect to Harvey and whoever paid for that sculpture. But how does that happen? To lose something that was universally known in front of this building for over 60 years to a little something like this with no history in front of the Supreme Court building. When it was decided that Wyoming was finally going to put a statue in Statuary Hall, it was to be Esther. They got the sculptor decided they had to raise the money. It wasn't going to the legislature now and saying, oh, we need, put that in comparison to what those 4 statues in Rotunda cost. No, they went to every county in Wyoming to raise money to fund the statue for DC. And I have 4 pages that will show you the contributions. Bear Royal School, $7. Old Agnes Krisnick from my hometown, her son Leroy was in the legislature years ago. Agnes had a little oil money. She could write a check for $300. That's one of the bigger contributions back then. This is the late 50s. Beauty shops, church auxiliaries, newspapers. To read it, it makes my heart just get so excited because there's no movements like that now. Industry paid for the big bucking horse out on the west side of the Capitol. Art patrons, most of whom I know, paid for the buffalo. You got the stock growers with the calf. Esther Hobart Morris represents the people's statue at the people's house. And what I see with her because I don't see her every day and I'm not coming in here and people miss her, especially the citizens of Cheyenne. We saw her every day. But she's a representation not only of Wyoming's proudest moment, she's the human representation of the state seal embedded in the sidewalk. Equal rights. She's the human face that goes with that seal in front of that Capitol. And she's a representation of the humility that this state should never get away from. I grew up in an oil boom. I saw the coal development. Well, my father ran for governor in '78 against Hirschler. Worried somebody from Campbell County was going to turn Wyoming into a big open coal mine. Well, thank God somebody, a lot of people, including Mike Enzi, got a lot of that done. But the humility that ought to represent that great big, some people say unattractive, strong, forward look on her face, working with men and women together to solve problems is what we need more of now. Those days when we were poor and kids from Bear Royal School had to contribute to something they felt so part of. Should never get away from that. So I want to take this up. I was glad to see Cowboy State Daily interviewed me a few weeks ago because they came to the house and interviewed my mother in the fall of 2019. Mike Rosenthal was also interviewed. But we can't just say, well, it's the student experience. I'm a mom. My son, I have a wonderful picture. He's about 8 years old, standing on the base that was in the junk pile. I have pictures when the Capitol was under construction. But he used to be able to stand there and look up at Esther, like a lot of other kids, tourists and Wyoming citizens, run up the steps to the rotunda and just be there. I wanted him to never be intimidated by an imposing building full of powerful people. And a little creativity This is pretty dull out here for kids. There was an idea, I think, on Facebook when we talked about putting those composites out there to line the hall. Get some silk screen images of Washakie, so big, so that a breeze will move and get kids engaged in that. There used to be a prism in the lobby of the Hirschler building, magical, forward thinking. Get that back in there. Kids would love that light coming through that huge art piece of a prism. There's endless ideas to make it seem more like a student center. But look at Esther out there and think about a lot of women and men solving problems. I think of Jenny Gordon when I look at Esther and her food program. Remarkable problem solving. I think of the Flemings, Dr. Pat Fleming, Dr. Ray Fleming, Dr. Don Fleming. Their brother works here. He's not a psychologist. They problem solved. They problem solved. That's what she represents. The suffrage issue of the late 1800s, but forward thinking, problem solving now with a certain humility, a certain pride. That's what we need out in front of that Capitol. Thank you. I took up too much time, but obviously I'm passionate about it. And I will continue to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sass.
My name is Glenn Garrett. I belong with Susan here. I'm also an architect. I've been at practice in downtown Cheyenne for 40 years now. And I've worked on this building. I helped bring light back into the legislative chambers with the uncovering of the skylights and stained glass. And I've worked a lot with historic buildings, and certainly this is the most historic prominent building in the state of Wyoming. And its construction renovation, I followed it with great interest here. Architecture is a consensus of the times, it seems, that people all agree together that they're going to do this, they're going to build something and finance it, plan it, tell how it's going to be, and it becomes a reality. And in looking at the Capitol grounds before the renovation here and looking at what people had placed on the grounds that they felt was important to say about our state, we had statements about cowboys, about cattle, about equality, about Indians, about our heritage with our natural buffalo. All those statues represented values that we held dear and were important enough to put onto the grounds here. Oh, and there was one other one, military. And that was on the corner, I don't know if all of you remembered or not, but the corner of 24th here in Central, there was a granite statue of a soldier, I believe from the Spanish-American War, taking his oath. And I don't know where that's gone, and that kind of concerns me a little bit. I would like to know the answer to that, and if somebody can tell me later, I would really appreciate it. But you know, those are the values we had. Certainly Esther represents a value of equality, and certainly the Indians are our native heritage and so forth. But when all those went away, it seems like a lot of the values that they represent, and especially missing the ones that the military and our Indian heritage and equality they've disappeared from the public view. And certainly just in reflection, I think that certainly tens of thousands of school kids come through here. I mean, certainly can't discount that. But there are countless people that see the Capitol from the outside that we don't even, know, and it reinforces that presence on the outside, reinforces that presence of our values on that. So I miss seeing Esther out there. The one thing that Secretary Treasurer said about permanent and temporary, certainly when all those statutes were put out there, they were meant to be permanent by the people that came together and put them there. And we know that that's not happening. So I also would suggest or observe here that whatever happens now with the placement in this gallery here, that's not permanent as well. And I had one other observation here that I'll just throw out here about your meeting. Separate the seal from the signage, and maybe things will work out a little bit better on that. So I appreciate you hearing me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jack. Other public comment?
Well, this is a little bit like Garrett Day, I guess, at the committee, but I'm not privileged to be related to these folks as far as I know, but my name is Richard Garrett. I think you probably all know me and maybe in several different contexts. I'm so proud to be a neighbor of Peg's. I too walk these neighborhoods and marvel at Cheyenne and Wyoming's history. I want to let this committee know how grateful I am to you all for your work. If it was easy, anybody could do it. I would never want to be thought to be second guessing your work or casting it in a negative light. Your work is incredibly important to the state of Wyoming. We've heard why just in the last 10 minutes or so. My only purpose in coming to these meetings is to learn. And if I learn, to try to contribute in a meaningful and positive way to what you're trying to accomplish on behalf of the people of the state of Wyoming and future generations too. And so it's within that context that I offer my assurance to you that I have nothing but heartfelt respect for the work that you're doing. And again, would only like to contribute in a very positive way to what you're doing. I will say that I would love to see Esther outside. I remember when she was. I remember when we had a replica of the Liberty Bell on the Capitol grounds too. And that always was a source of inspiration for me. There's also a little tiny marker out front of the Capitol. Maybe some of you have seen it, maybe some of you haven't. It's at the base of an elm tree on 24th. And it describes that elm tree being part of a tree that was grown at Mount Vernon, George Washington's home. And that's just a tiny bit of evidence about how important Wyoming is to the nation as a whole, I think. And so with that, I certainly stand for any questions, but I'm so proud to be here and I thank you all for allowing me this time.
Thanks, Mr. Garrett, for your continued support. You were coming to wayfinding meetings before it was cool.
I'm just trying to find my way. Oh, I do have one suggestion. If I may be so bold, and that is, I was thinking about how one tries to identify the elected officials' offices and how they're identified in Washington, D.C. and distinguished one from another with state flags outside the main entrance to each member of the congressional delegation from respective states. And just a thought, perhaps outside those offices here in our capital, there could be a state flag, which would denote that as being an important entrance to an office, if you will. So just an idea to toss out there.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Go for it.
Hi, most of you know me as Amy from the radio. I grew up in New York.
And I will tell you, I could never get into the Capitol building in New York without an armed guard probably. And my mom came out here and she just absolutely, she was born in New Jersey, raised in New Jersey. She absolutely thought this was the coolest place on the planet. And guess what she thought was the coolest thing ever? Was seeing Esther's statue in front of the Capitol and Chief Washakie. So she thought that was the coolest thing ever because it just doesn't happen elsewhere. She did not know that Wyoming was the first state to give women the right to vote. She didn't know that. So she thought this was the coolest state. So I just wanted to put that out there for you.
Mr. Wolfson, you're the only one left. Would you like to say anything?
No.
I'm gonna be very quick. In our proposal in fall of 2019, which we made to the governor, an official legal kind of letter, and then my dog wrote a letter about being four-legged. He wanted the governor to know, listen, I can say this, I'm four-legged, but the statues all around the Capitol now all have four legs: a horse, a buffalo, a calf. It's important to put that human spirit back out front. I'd be happy to share any of this information, all the clippings, letters to the editor, whatever, if you're interested. But our proposal did mention Washakie. My mother was a benefactor of that Washakie statue. We have a smaller version in the dining room. It's a magnificent piece of art. So you look at the aesthetic of that statue down with no natural light, really. And I understand keeping him safe, the feathers. When you look at it so close, it's such intricate work. He's the same artist that did the Washakie on the running horse along Grand Avenue. That's what outdoor sculpture is supposed to do. Big, bold, and get that fire going in the heart. Unfortunately, a lot of the new scattered sculpture is, with all due respect, it's not that kind of art. Like the Esther in front of the Supreme Court building. But our suggestion was to put the Washakie back up on a pedestal to create that grandness that his spirit was, and put him in the atrium at the Barrett building. Because that has a huge skylight. Washakie didn't want the public housing they wanted him to have. Hell no. He wanted to be with the sky. He wanted to be with the stars. And you put him in that atrium over there, and he's got that 24/7. That light will come in and enhance that luster that McGarry was so famous for. He needs that. And then they do put a teepee right out, starting about any time now, once the snow is supposed to be gone, out in front of the Barrett building. And so he can have his teepee, he can have his stars, he can have his sky, he can have his rain clouds. He deserves that. And it's also a way, let's look at marketing and tourism. I happen to be a big lover of the state archives, in the state library too, but state archives, one of the best kept secrets in the state of Wyoming. And that statue draws even more people into that building, to the museum, to the archives. It's a tool, it's a bigger picture than just enhancing student experience down here. Thanks. And listen, I hope I haven't been at all disrespectful. Thank you for all your work. I'm sitting here thinking, how do you people sit in these damn meetings day after day after day? I admire them.
Thank you.
And I thank you.
Thank you for your comment. I think we could all use some natural light about this point, so thank you. I would also maybe make an unscheduled pitch. You all are very passionate about this building and passionate about Esther. And I would all suggest you consider a career as a volunteer docent, perhaps, with these tour groups that come through. I served as a sort of helper docent because I'm not good enough to be a real docent, but I served as a helper docent for my son's 4th grade class, two classes. In fact, it was enlightening. It was enlightening to me. and very meaningful and really important. And it was a day on which the weather happened to be fairly lousy and pretty cold and windy. And so I would just encourage you all to contact your local LSO and consider if there might be opportunities for that. And please, Rihanna, or forgive me, Rihanna, but I mean that sort of in jest, but absolutely not at all in jest. That I think there are opportunities there to sort of get involved in that. So with that, I think we've heard from everyone, so I'll go ahead and close public comment. I'm gonna actually jump into agenda item number 8 so that then we can break this room and go on our wayfinding walk. And that is other meetings and adjournments. So we have meetings set on June 27th and July 19th, just recognizing we have a lot of work to do and a little time to do it in. So those are set. And LSO has laid out tentative meeting dates. August 23rd, September 25th or 26th, October 18th or 19th, and then November 28th through the 30th, and January 3rd through the 5th. I think what LSO needs right now, if any of those are completely a no for, particularly for the appointed members of the committee, that's what what they would need to know. So if you can let Rihanna know that. She has already checked those against the legislative calendar, so I think you need to worry less about checking your legislative calendars, but personal vacation, et cetera. Is that what you need?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Nicholas, Treasurer Meyer. Senator Landon and Representative Hurd, I did check your meeting schedule, but this looks to be like the most open dates. So just if you have any blackout dates personally to notify me. Or forever hold your peace, right?
Yeah, so which date are you looking at? I was looking at these nifty
I know.
memorial benches here.
So there's about 7 dates listed on the agenda, if you want to look at those on in item number 8 on the agenda.
Yeah, September 25th through 26th with these. They don't conflict with any legislative meeting, SBC meetings, split meetings.
So the only 5 or 6 white squares that I had on my calendar.
Now you're gonna have one.
For personal travel, I think it's conflicted.
I would prefer September 26th. On those like for.
September.
It's closer to 26.
I have a board meeting for my day job.
That works September 26th.
26 is better.
Okay. October 18th or 19th.
For the 19th.
Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and hold the 26th.
Yep, October 18th or 19th.
Thank you, everyone. I know this was painful, but it's so helpful.
Representative Sherwood prefers the 19th.
Good work.
Can I get a second?
So
What sort of meeting are we talking about? Half day?
A minimum half day, perhaps longer if needed. As we've experienced, the meetings tend to go a lot longer every single time, even if I do a half day. So I've heard both 18th or 19th. Is there?
I got a dental appointment on the 19th. 18th is free. 17th is.
Okay, on the morning, on the mornings of those. Either one is fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good either one.
Well. And are you okay on August 23rd? That's the only date that there's not a conflict. There's a lot of legislative meetings. Does it work for everyone? That's.
Yeah, that August is.
Isn't there appropriations on this one either?
I'm not sure it's just.
No, it's not on that.
Oh.
I checked again. What are we? I've given you enough time to meet with the crowd.
Yeah. Thank you. Much better. Good.
Okay.
It was October confirmed that help.
So October or August 23rd works for you, Representative Nicholas? You don't have appropriations, you have caps in the next week, and appropriations is in July, is my understanding.
But we have an appropriation.
Appropriations is July 10th. Yeah, it's. Okay. So it sounds like August 23rd, September 26th, and October.
Which day in October?
Which day in October? 19. Okay. And then maybe we can come back and decide on the November and January dates. So November and January dates are based on the appropriation schedule, appropriation hearings. All right, Nigel, did you want to kind of give just a quick 1-minute primer of what Will and Brandon are going to walk everyone through?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, let me just share my screen real quick here, because and I'll promise to keep it fast, just to kind of set up what the intent of the next little bit is going to be when you go outside. Can you see my screen again for the walkthrough? So basically, what you need to understand about a wayfinding strategy is progressive disclosure. And what that says is that the main job of wayfinding is to get you from A to B and to understand where B is. That seems fairly simple until you start to incorporate everything that is involved in a building like the campus here, all the different buildings, all the different possible directions you can take. So you can't tell everything here at the same time. Otherwise, it's an overwhelming amount of information. So progressive disclosure, think of it like you're in a stadium and you're trying to find your seat. When you get out of the car, the sign you see doesn't say seat F in row 12 in section 200. It tells you how to get to the building, and then from the building, how to get to the entry, and from the entry to the floor, to the wing, to the area, to the destination until you've arrived. So that progressive disclosure gets you closer and closer without giving you too much information that overwhelms you, but giving you enough information that gets you there. So this exercise will start you down at the corner of the southeast corner at this intersection right here. And that'll start you where that first sign is. And we'll give you a page. You'll have a page for each of those signs. It'll show you what the sign type will look like. It'll tell you what's on that sign, and it'll show you the location of the sign. So as you walk through, you'll turn the page and look at the next one, and that will show you an image of what that sign looks like, what it'll say on that sign and the direction the arrows are pointing, and where it's located. And you'll just walk through that as you walk through the building until you get to the different destinations that we've designated for this experience. The first is to get you from this corner to a meeting room. We're walking you through the first floor instead of through the garden level entrance, because it'll help you to be exposed to more of the content of the signs as you move through. To our typical audience, though, we would probably send them through the garden level entrance, because that's the most efficient route to the extension. So you go through there, the next stop is the extension, and then from there, we'll give you guidance to go from the extension, the meeting rooms there, up to the revenue department. So you can see how those work and just coordinate as the signs change from that are used in the Capitol to those used in the Herschel building. Is that enough, Rihanna? Do you want any more explanation?
I think that's probably sufficient, and Will can provide more context. I was just going to remind everyone before everybody fully checks out that DI has uploaded the wayfinding message schedule. So that's like every single piece of content of what's going to be on the sign with the sign type and the location maps in file stage for your review and feedback, with a deadline of May 12th. So that's been uploaded for you to review, and I would suggest having 2 screens up because it's incredibly cumbersome and you need to be able to think about where it is in the building and what the sign says.
We just got that yesterday.
You just got it now, just now. Okay, so that's kind of, as Auditor Racina says, your homework, and then what's gonna come is the content, and that will come in the following weeks outside of our June 27th meeting.
Madam Chairman, just for clarification, one of the things that I have alluded to kind of in passing, and I didn't want it to be confused. But I looked at Wendy and kind of requested, but not formally, the statutory and past sorts of documents that, and it was also the representative thought we could utilize things from the state archives, that kind of thing. I didn't want that to be confused, but I think that would all be helpful to get us started in the direction of what kind of document are we gonna try to come up with to come back to the SBC with? Hope that makes sense.
Yep.
Thank you. Madam Chair.
Anything else before we? And
Well-
Will, are you our tour guide?
I guess I am. So if everybody's ready to take a walk, I did take their floor plans that they have with all the.
I'm officially announcing that we're adjourned.
And just announce that you're just doing the walk.
And also where we are heading now, for those of you joining us on YouTube, we are headed to do a wayfinding walk around the Capitol. There will be no action taken or decision.
Both exterior and interior.
Both.